Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on behalf of Institute of Peace and Diplomatic Studies. I am Abdul Basit. There is some technical issue with Ms. Farad's audio. She's fixing it. Meanwhile, in the interest of time, let's get started. As you can see, today's topic is the impact of coronavirus on terrorism. Before I proceed, I will request all the participants to mute their videos so you can hear the speakers clearly. So kindly mute your audio so we can proceed. The format of today's webinar is that first I'll discuss global terrorism in the context of COVID-19. I'm Abdul Basit and I'm from the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. I'm a research fellow there. I'll be followed by Jade Hutchinson. Jade is a Ph.D. student in Australia. He has his expertise in right-wing extremism. He also teaches at two prominent universities in Australia. And Jade will be followed by Ms. Shaheera Syed. Ms. Shaheera Syed is a communication expert based in Islamabad. Her expertise are in conflict and peace studies as well. And she will be looking at the social media side of extremist narratives and how they have evolved during the COVID-19. So without a further ado, I'll take the lead and present my findings of the topic, which is global terrorism and its impact, COVID-19 and its impact on global terrorism. Now, as you know that we are living through some very unprecedented times. The pandemic has been a great equalizer. It doesn't discriminate along political, ethnic, and religious lines. At the same time, coronavirus has exposed inequalities between the have and have-nots in our societies. Now, the opinions of terrorism scholars about the impact of coronavirus on terrorism is divided. There are those who believe that it is a great challenge for the terrorist and those who believe that it is a great opportunity for the terrorist. I'm going to synthesize these two shades of opinion, and I'll share my findings with the caveat that because we haven't been faced with such a situation, it is an unprecedented situation. So what I'm going to say is more speculative. Some of it may stay with us, some of it may become redundant, while some of the trends that I'm going to highlight with the passage of time, they may evolve into something different. It is also important to remember that what happens after the pandemic is more important than what happens during the pandemic. And that's a very important point to keep in mind. So with that, I will present my presentation as the good, which is the challenge for the terrorist, the bad, which is an opportunity for the terrorist, and the ugly, which is what is likely to come after the pandemic and what kind of period we are looking at. So first, coming to the good part. The good part is that, as you know, by its very definition, terrorism is propaganda by the deed. So terrorists need an audience. They require publicity, and that is their oxygen. So they don't do violence for the sake of violence. For them, violence is a means towards an end, and for that they need to highlight their ideology, demands, and grievances. Right now, we are in a situation where pandemic has, stolen the limelight from the terrorists. So they are unable to get that limelight. At the same time, the psychological effect of terrorism is to intimidate people. Right now, you have a pandemic which is more terrorizing than the terrorists. As a matter of fact, the terrorists are equally scared of the pandemic. So they have been telling their operatives not to go to area where there is a pandemic or coronavirus and don't bring it to us. So that is their first challenge. Then the second set of challenges come from social lockdowns and other lockdown measures that have been put in place by different countries. So as you know that large gatherings are not allowed during the pandemic. So the attack opportunities are very few. For conventional large scale attacks, there are very few opportunities. They can do low end terrorism, stabbing, vehicular ramming, but large scale conventional terrorist attack, there are very fewer opportunities available to the terrorists right now. And that should be, we can assume, frustrating for them. Then for the foreign terrorist fighters who wanted to travel to Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, different other countries right now, due to travel restriction, that will also be frustrating for them that they are unable to travel. Equally challenging for them would be to generate funds conventionally. They have to, they'll have to do out of the box thinking to generate their finances. So this is the good part and the good news for the international community, societies, and the counterterrorism community, that they are unable to mobilize, launch attacks, and the limelight has been stolen for them. So this is a great test of the terrorism theory, which says if we pay less attention to the terrorists, there will be less violence then. But we'll see what happens towards the end of it. As I said, that what happens after the pandemic is more important than what happens during the pandemic. Now I come to the bad part. What's the bad part? What are the opportunities for the terrorists? So as you know that everyone is stranded at their homes, and this is a time of great uncertainty. There is a lot of uncertainty and fear among the people that what is going on, then what is going to happen to them, what will happen after the pandemic. Now, in this environment of fear, in this environment of uncertainty, terrorists, when everyone is glued on the internet, that's a great opportunity for the terrorists to promote their extremist agendas and try to woo people. So there are all kinds of misinformation, disinformation, conspiracy theories generated by the terrorists, and explosion of extremist narratives on the social media. Now, Shaheera Syed will talk about it in more detail, but I just wanted to point it out here. So that's one opportunity where they can, they can promote their agenda and they can radicalize a lot of people. Then, in another opportunity for the terrorist is they can pose themselves as social service providers, particularly in those states and communities where the writ of the state is weak, there are ungoverned spaces, and there are gaps in the delivery. The terrorists, for instance, Afghan Taliban, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in Syria, Al-Shabaab in Somalia, Boko Haram in Nigeria, they are well aware that if they are able to provide this governance and health facilities, not only it will add to their legitimacy, but they will be able to win the sympathies of the people as well. Then another opportunity for the terrorist is that because of the pandemic, manpower and resources have been reallocated towards public health emergency. So America has totally withdrawn from Syria. They are withdrawing from Afghanistan. They have minimized their footprint in Iraq. What does this mean? This means less pressure on these big terrorist networks like the Afghan Taliban, the Islamic State in Iraq, as well as other groups in different parts of the world. And this will, if that pressure is gone from there, that counter-terrorism pressure is not there, this means the revival of these big terrorist networks. And you pick any one of these groups, whether it's the Taliban, Islamic State, or Al-Qaeda, each one of them in their own right is quite capable of undermining regional peace and stability. That is another opportunity. As a result of that, you see 33% increase in the terrorist attacks in Iraq. Another opportunity for the terrorists is the use of technology during the pandemic. So the greater technological penetration, use of artificial intelligence, drones and robots to minimize human contact, because right now what is being discouraged is that human to human contact should be minimized. So the robots can be used for surveillance, drones can be used for food delivery, for disinfectant sprays and all. And this is an opportunity for the terrorist, in a sense that commercially available technology can be modified for other purposes as well. Both Islamic State and Al Qaeda have spent a lot of energy and time in using and molding this technology for attacks. So this is another opportunity for them. Now I come to the last part of my presentation, which is the ugly part. And as I told you and emphasized the point that what happens after the pandemic is more important than what happens during the pandemic. Now we are looking at a period where we are foreseeing, because right now what we are going through is a great recession economically, great political instability. A lot of people have lost their jobs, and a lot more people going forward are going to lose their jobs. The longer the pandemic lasts, the longer will be the period of recession, and the longer it would take for the states to revive. So you have this situation post pandemic where the confidence of the people is shaken in the government. If they have lost their jobs, a lot of unemployed people with a shaken confidence in the government and anger, it all comes together, and it's an explosive mix and a very conducive environment for the terrorists to recruit people. So you could see new forms of violence emerging. You could see anti-government violence post-pandemic, and it could take different forms of political violence, protest. Some of these people could be recruited by the terrorists. You could also see people agitating against technology. Those people particularly who are going to lose their jobs to technological revolution, the artificial intelligence and automation. We have that example of Luddites in the UK who lost their jobs to these machines, and they used to violently protest in the Britain in early 19th century against machines and against the industrial revolution. Currently, we have examples of people who believe in the conspiracy theory that 5G technology is causing coronavirus. And there have been attacks on 5G technology poles within Europe. This could become a trend going forward. Another form of violence one could foresee is of environmentalists, because some of them are saying this is the revenge of Mother Nature, the way we live, our lifestyles, culture of consumerism. This all has pushed the nature to its limits, and now nature is taking its revenge. So if in the post-pandemic period we revert back to our pre-COVID-19 lifestyles, some of these environmentalists who are quite capable of mounting violence may take to the streets and may violently agitate. So you have this period where what happens after the pandemic, it needs to be seen. So unemployment, environmentalists, anti-technology groups, anti-government groups, this all could take different shapes of violence. Some of it may spill over into terrorism, some of it may become political violence, some of it may take shapes of various social movements or protest movements. So these are my initial remarks. I'll stop here, and I look forward to a very engaging discussion during the question and answer. And now I'll invite Jade to introduce himself properly,
Basit,
which I couldn't.
Bas-
And then over to you, Jade.
Basit, if you can hear me.
Yes, yes, please.
Oh, good. Finally, I'm so sorry about this technical glitches that can happen. The technology is not so human friendly, but still. Basit, can you share the host option again back to me? I'm so grateful and honored that you all three young scholars who are sharing this important panel with us, and this has given us the hope that in these kind of challenging times we all will be able to navigate better through the all process. Basit, we have to go live on the session, but because of I shared the host with you, so just to shift the host option to me, and then I'll go live, and then I'll be asking Jade for his presentation,
So
and I'll
how
also
do
be
I do
asking
that?
Jade for the presentation because it's in the computer. you can give me the host option to my computer, which is Institute of Peace and Diplomatic Studies, and then I'll share the screen and about Jade's presentation as well. Can you do that? You only use the option, right click, and then you just have to, on the top of me, there's Institute of Peace and Diplomatic Studies, you have to right click it, and then you have to share, say that I can be the host. Choose option. Yeah, it says on the top of it, you can see Institute of Peace
Okay,
and Diplomatic
okay,
Study. When you
okay.
right
There
click
you
on
go.
the, I'm so sorry about this, but the
Okay.
conversation is so important that we need to. Okay, thank you, Basit. Thank you so much for making this happen. What we can do is that we can give the floor to Jade. Thank you so much, Jade, for sharing your insight, sharing your presence here, and then of course making me the host. Yes, grateful, and a lot of people who are coming in, a lot of people who are joining in. A bit of information about Institute of Peace and Diplomatic Studies. It's a primary think tank. We call ourselves Think and Do Tank. We all know not only think, but we also try to implement and advocate the policy. Jade and Shaheera and Basit, thank you so much for sharing this panel. Jade, floor is all yours.
Fantastic. Yeah, as Basit mentioned, I'm Jade Hutchinson. I'm a Ph.D. candidate in the Department of Security Studies and Criminology at Macquarie University in Australia, and also a Ph.D. candidate at the Research Centre for Media and Journalism Studies at Groningen University. And just before I start, I'm very thankful, and it's an honor to be invited to be on this panel as a part of the Institute for Peace and Diplomatic Studies to virtually deliver this presentation on right-wing extremism and COVID-19. My research, it predominantly focuses on right-wing extremism, terrorism, related to certain groups and individuals within Australia and Canada and the United States. And this is largely where the presentation and its contents are based. Did you have a handle on the presentation PowerPoint slides? Or I'm happy to go on without them if necessary.
I think you should go without this. I should.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah, please go
No,
ahead.
not a problem. So before I'll start my time. So before I delve into some of the contours of right-wing extremist ideology, I just wanted to preview a few images for you. But as I said, the PowerPoint slides are unavailable at this time, and they were just pictures of certain groups within Australia, Canada, and the United States, such as Reclaim Australia and True Blue Crew, who were affiliated with Brenton Tarrant before his terrorist attack in Christchurch, New Zealand, a racist skinhead group, and a right-wing militia group referred to as the Three Percenters. So at this point, these particular groups are, uncharacteristically entering public spaces and participating in the socio-political carnage, basically, that's currently going on in the United States, as well as the Ku Klux Klan and neo-Nazis on one side. Basically, the slide was intended to illustrate the diversity and broad spectrum of actors and groups and sub-movements in these countries. So rather than like a homogeneous front that's either characterized by a single objective here or a single vision for society there are many sides of right-wing extremism. And only on rare occasion do these groups display aspects of interoperability or can possibly form a transient collective. However, there is an increasing concern that there is going to be a more organized or cooperative movement following the Christchurch attack in New Zealand, the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, and of course the ongoing related violence in the Ukraine. So just a broad outline of some of the more common ideological characteristics, and I'll come back to why it's important to point these out. But anti-otherism is really important. So they respond aggressively to perceived encroachment or the systematic integration of certain outgroups. So a kind of group or community's entire purpose can be founded on like anti-democratic or xenophobic or racist or misogynistic or homophobic, transphobic, even anti-disability values. So they view society and the social hierarchy that they're in as unstable and uncertain and feel that sort of immediate action is necessary to protect it. There's also anti-establishment values. So this sense of uncertainty, of instability is exacerbated by the government and the media industry, who is also considered an outgroup, right? Who is now cooperating more and more with other outgroups. And they're being conspired or being led by liberal values and activities like multiculturalism or interreligious tolerance or immigration and these other things. They also advocate for and seek to protect Western traditional values and have it manifest within a strong state. So because they see liberal democratic governments as weak or corrupted by outgroups, they long for a future where conservative governments actually champion this sort of traditional ultra-nationalist and isolationist values and policies that they think will favor white nationalists who feel nostalgic for a time before, the other didn't arrive. One example where this happened was the reemergence, the popularity and enthusiasm of right-wing extremist groups in the United States following Donald Trump's ascension to the presidency in 2016. Now, the reason I point this out is that the COVID-19 pandemic has applied immense pressure to these kinds of ideological viewpoints, and subsequently, it's amplified feelings of fear and hysteria and paranoia, and it's gifted the circumstances in which to base conspiracy theories and prophetic visions of a kind of an apocalyptic near future, right? Certain groups are using current affairs to energize and justify an increase in online activity, in violence, to mobilize followers, and to ramp up recruitment efforts. So this virus has effectively heightened the extreme right's already paranoid perception of certain groups as being the causal mechanism for society's ills, and has highlighted descriptive notions that certain outgroups are kind of contaminated, or they're impure, or they're disproportionately responsible for this outbreak. For instance, there has been an increase in hate crime and hate speech, both racist and ideologically motivated acts of intimidation and violence, especially anti-Asian racism and anti-Semitism, both online and in public. Certain groups at the most extreme end of this spectrum have actually been encouraging the spread of the disease as a form of genocide, and have discussed plans to use the virus as a biological weapon, right? So this possibility of infecting certain groups and even first responders like nurses and doctors through coughing or spitting on them, or otherwise infecting public facilities. Another side of this is that the recent physical distancing measures that Basit pointed out is coupled with an increased unemployment, right, which also has seen many young people, particularly students, feeling disconnected from their friends or from their family or from society at large. And this social isolation can lead to increased levels of loneliness and depression, right? And this creates a danger because this creates an opportunity for more of these groups to recruit young people by just offering them a sense of belonging, just offering them a place to feel valued and feel respected and connected with others. This is, again, another opportunity where these groups sort of spin this apocalyptic narrative that it's going to be the end of days and that there's a race war approaching between the West and immigrants. So this advocates for a kind of urgency and survivalism. So other concerns of growing, like this particular strategy of survivalist recruitment in neo-Nazi groups that are targeting police and military personnel in particular, because they have access to weapons and that kind of tactical training. Now, online, both in mainstream and alternative social media platforms, there has been a real surge in right-wing extremist content, including anti-Semitic, anti-Chinese, and Islamophobic rhetoric that is specifically tailored to this pandemic, right? So this includes the circulation of certain conspiracy theories that have racist and anti-government undertones that are suggesting that those with that are of Asian descent are actually intending to infect the West with this virus, or that certain governments are using the pandemic to intentionally employ certain tyrannical measures to exert a new level of control over the citizenry. Now, there have also been messages online that express a hope that this particular virus will continue to spread throughout the world and reduce numbers of particular groups. This is best represented in the Hug a Jew campaign. This particular virus as well has ushered into popularity the term accelerationism. So this refers to a last stand for white supremacists who seek to hasten the collapse of society so that fascist revolutionaries can sort of sweep in and destroy the system and eradicate what they would refer to as race traitors holding power. accelerationism is ideologically similar in principle, right, to aspects of jihadism, both in its primary objective, let's say, or one objective, and the means of attaining it. For instance, certain right-wing and jihadist extremists would envision a pure ethnographic state or society that is, say, grounded in ideological fundamentalism. And the most effective means of attaining it may be accelerating society towards a kind of apocalyptic flashpoint, right, where the intention is to ignite maximum chaos and uncertainty. At this point, those who oppose them, or just even by their very existence, contaminate their vision for society, are excommunicated or eradicated, right? This can be referred to as takfirs or non-whites for each sort of ideological sub-movement, respectively. This is followed by the reconstruction of society in their preferred image, right? So either a caliphate or an Anglo-European utopia. Some long-term implications of this is that we don't know how long COVID-19 will continue to dominate issues of global concern, right? Such as national, international budgets and economies and supply chains. Again, this was already referenced to Basit, but a couple of things I want to echo here is that, like counterterrorism, budgets could be reduced significantly because of the extended economic pressure. And this could be coupled with the possibility that due to these circumstances, less and less attention is paid to these kinds of groups and individuals who will use this time to organize an act of terrorism or recruit or to facilitate and even maybe continue the targeted spread of the virus. And as Basit mentions, there may also be a chance where when this virus finally reduces, that this kind of time to prepare might manifest in an attack later on. There's also limited or restricted access to certain essential items due to breakdowns in supply chains, which increases hysteria and anti-establishment grievances. So regardless of the pandemic's lethality, its capacity to pressurize psychologies, to generate society-wide grievances, and to unravel, right, the international organization is unquestionable. This disorganization, the pressure, may exacerbate conditions that are not only conducive for right-wing extremist ideology, but actually elevate justifications for right-wing terrorism. Just in the last 20 seconds, I just wanted to summarize some of the points. So there has been an increase of violent extremism, an increase in online extremism. There's a fear of ramping up of recruitments, and there are a series of long-term implications associated with budgets, economies, and supply chains. And I think that's should be my 10 minutes there. So again, thank you all so much for listening, and I really look forward to your questions in the discussion.
Thank you so much, Jade. Thank you so much for your input, for your presentation. I think there would be a lot of questions would be asked from you and Basit as well. So before I hand over the floor to Ms. Shaheera Syed, who is part of one of the important organizations here in Islamabad and looking after, and she will be talking about the social media and how it is important, especially related to the terrorist narratives and various other extremist narratives that are, currently building, and how they are, these are so much important to understand as well. So Shaheera, floor is all yours. And Shaheera is part of the strategic communication team in a Democracy Reporting International here in Islamabad. So Shaheera, floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Farhad, for inviting me to speak on this panel and for your kind introduction. I'll be explaining the social media in the context of COVID-19. And for this, I'd like to take you down a trip down the memory lane. Historically, whenever there is an outbreak of a disease, the formal recommendations made by medical expert communities are more often than not muffled by a barrage of half-baked advice, sketchy remedies, and misguided theories. So in that regard, COVID-19 is not really different. How it's different, though, is the sheer proliferation of bad information, which is kind of surrounding this crisis through digital media platforms and social media. The UN Secretary General went as far as to say this is the pandemic of misinformation. And experts are now saying this is the first ever social media infodemic that we are facing. So in that regard, this pandemic is very different as well as dangerous. because people are not only merely consuming the information from online sources, but they're actively decimating them and taking part in creating this misinformation and disinformation. And in that regard, it's very different from the previous pandemics that we saw in the form of MERS or H1N1. As already pointed out by Basit and Jade as well, that terrorists are actually looking forward to exploit any kind of vulnerability that exists in the environment. And COVID-19 has kind of exacerbated all of this. So what's happening around is that people are losing their jobs, they're losing their loved ones every single day. They're extremely frustrated. They don't trust the mainstream media as much as they used to, but then the need for getting accurate information is there. So they're relying on social media more and more to get information and to stay updated. There is this level of animosity against the government, especially in the case of Pakistan, where the government hasn't given accurate and trustworthy information to the people. So there's that animosity as well. So together, what happens is that it creates the perfect breeding ground for radicalization. And on top of that, what you have is that hundreds and thousands of bits of information which are appearing on our digital screens every single day. So it adds to the anxiety, it adds to the frustration, and then ultimately it creates panic in the people. So I'll talk about like these four main trends that I see on the social media platform with regards to COVID-19. Number one is that people don't know what is true and what is false anymore, which is a very scary idea because the amount of misinformation and disinformation, which is kind of plaguing the social media platforms, it kind of crowds out whatever facts and accurate news that there is out there. We have heard absolutely bizarre conspiracy theories from how 5G is responsible for this, how Bill Gates is behind this. And in Pakistan's case, we hear theories like the hospitals and the government administration is actually involved with injecting the people with the virus so that they can get some money as a result of this. So people don't know what is true or what is false anymore. And when there is such a huge surge of this information, it's very difficult to filter out what is accurate and what is not. Number two is, as already pointed out by other panelists, is that the extremists are actually going to use this as an opportunity to broaden the appeal of their narrative. And we already see that that is happening. They are preying on this newly captive online audience. The transnational militants such as Al-Qaeda and ISIS are kind of framing COVID-19 as this divine retribution against infidels who are waging a war against Islam. What they're doing through social media platforms is that by using certain hashtags, they're kind of redirecting this online audience towards their jihadist propaganda, which is very, very scary. And then Jade already talked about how white supremacists are also using these online platforms to spew hate against certain minority groups. The third point that I would like to make is that regarding something that Jade talked about a bit is the online space already has been a long point of exposure and radicalization for young people. As many students are out of schools, they're not engaging in recreational and cultural activities. They're spending more and more time online, and they're increasingly frustrated because they don't see hope in the future. We see a lot of unemployment as well. So all of that, when it couples together in this mixture, what happens is that they become more susceptible to the online propaganda that they're exposed to. This means that the people who are on the mainstream, they're kind of brought on the fringe, which is a very scary trend to begin with. And then the last point that I would like to mention is we might see a change in the tactics by the extremists as well. We have seen the terrorists actually using the cyber attacks, but then that has been limited to a certain extent. But as more and more people are coming online, we might see that because of the pandemic, the terrorists might enhance their cyber attack abilities and even attempt to target certain opportunities which exist in the form of conducting attacks against critical response infrastructures like hospitals, and exacerbating the health impact of the pandemic overall. So I would lastly like to just say that as more and more people are moving online, we just have to remember that so are the extremists, and the danger exists out there. Because if they take control of the discourse and the online discussions, then we may have a bigger challenge than the health epidemic that we are facing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shaheera, for your remarks. I think that your conversation around social media and, of course, the conversation around the cybersecurity and cyber terrorism is so important. And I think that there are lot of work needs to be done, because COVID-19 has not only posed challenge on the social sides of our societies, but also about how we are safe online, because this is very important. So, Basit, a lot of questions have been asked in the chat box. There are a lot of people who have been asking you a lot of questions. If you see, one question that has now been asked is about the jihadi extremists. They say that COVID-19 will not affect the true believers. No change can be noticed in their modus operandi or level of activity, but they will recruit more people who have lost their job, rather for status and money and ideology and religion. So this has been asked by one of the experts who is part of the EU delegation, Zablut, who is part of this conversation as well. Thank you for the question. Basit, this is from you, and of course, panelists, if you can also contribute about how this COVID pandemic has increasingly helping more recruitment within the organization, the terrorist organizations, and
Okay, can you hear me, Farad?
We can.
Okay, okay.
yes, we can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, okay. So we lost you. I lost you somewhere towards the end of your question. So if I understand correctly, the gist of the question is that the Islamist or the jihadist militants will continue with the recruitment. They will further their agendas, and it's not going to deter them. Well, I agree with it. It has been an opportunity and an unprecedented opportunity. If you look at the way the jihadists have responded to COVID-19 to start with, it was an opportunity and a movement for them for they used the COVID-19 outbreak as a point for ideological validation of their extremist narrative. For instance, ISIS called it the wrath of God against the quote unquote the infidels. Al Qaeda called it the little soldier of God. ISIS also said that the fear of the pandemic is more dangerous than the pandemic itself. So, increase their pain and sufferings because of them waging the so called global war on terror. Now, the way terrorist groups have spun, their narrative with geographical relocation of the COVID-19 from China via Iran to Europe is interesting. It's quite opportunistic, very, very exploitative. Initially, they said for what China is doing to the Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang, it is a punishment of God for the Chinese communists. When it hit Iran, they said, oh, look at these Shia Muslims for their impurities, impure practices, and apostasies. It is the punishment of God for the Shia Muslims. When it went to the Europe, they said, well, oh, they have been waging a war against us, so the God is punishing them. So as COVID-19 went from one country to another and changed the region, the narrative, evolved accordingly. So terrorist groups, by their very nature, are resilient, adaptive. They operate in adverse circumstances. It's a way of life for them. So definitely, as compared to the normal society, it was easier for them to adjust. So definitely, yes, they will increase their propaganda. Yes, they will recruit more people. They will cash in on these anxieties, and I don't see this stopping. But then, at a very general level, at an academic level, you got to see both sides of the picture. So definitely, while it is an opportunity, it definitely is a challenge. For instance, what the challenge is, you are able to recruit, you are able to radicalize, but if you are not able to put that recruitment and radicalization into practice, so you are as good in the world of a terrorist, a group is as good as the group's ability to inflict violence. So if you are unable to inflict, we do not know when the pandemic is going to end. So if you are unable to inflict violence, then are you really worth your claims? So as far as, if I look at it in terms of capability, opportunity, and intention, the intention is there. Capability is there for some groups, but is the opportunity there? I think the opportunity might be available post pandemic. During the pandemic, there are some question marks over it. I would, yeah, I would stop here.
Thank you, Basit. That was a wonderful response. If anybody wants to share on the panel, you can also respond. There are several questions in the chat box. One question is about Basit, and from Jade, from both of you, is that possibility of states within the states are going to weaken the institutions of regular governments, right? There's one question on that, and another question is related to the online applications, communications. We are frequently using the Zoom, links, and many other search engines, right? So how to control those, as nothing online is secure and safe, and especially Shaheera, your conversation on how the internet or online conversations or online presence of us all is safe or secure. So how is it that we need to be very careful? And the second question was about the state within the state, how they are they will be weakened because of COVID-19.
Yeah, look, I'm happy to at least make a few comments on the question in regards to different kinds of search engines, or perhaps even kinds of online behavior that I have seen, particularly within COVID-19. So, for instance, there was an analysis that was conducted in the months following the outbreak of the coronavirus, or sorry, I should say COVID-19 specifically, and it showed that certain right-wing extremists or radicals are capitalizing on alternative social media platforms, but also sometimes these alternative social media platforms like Gab have a tailor-made browser, and it's called Gab's tailor-made browser is called Dissenter, and so there they can search and upload kinds of anti-Semitic and in this case anti-Chinese rhetoric that's specific to this COVID-19 pandemic. You also have other search engines, right, like Yandex, which is a Russian-sponsored search engine that is considered to be quite insecure, but its capacities are quite astonishing. Like, you can draw on kinds of facial recognition databases and Google information from Google Maps to basically triangulate who and where someone is using kinds of just alternative or less sponsored search engines. So as much as my concern is around those more mainstream search engines like Google or other kinds of viewing software like Zoom, I'm more concerned about the ones that we pay less attention to, like ones like Dissenter and ones like Yandex. And the reason why that is that there is also, I think, more of a long-term trend in how these particular groups are becoming more more literate with open source intelligence techniques. Like, their capacity to gather information, open source information, just by using their phone or their laptop is becoming increasingly, they're developing a kind of aptitude that rivals people that are doing this full time, right? Because a lot of them are dedicated enough to and feel motivated enough to use the technology that is most available to them and that's available to everyone else. And one I think manifestation of this is something called human flesh searches, which is a incredibly skin tingling kind of name for this kind of lateral surveillance where you have just a group of citizens that are becoming better and better at using the internet, at finding people, right? And so this isn't of any kind of institution that's associated with a government or anyone that's necessarily trained in intelligence. It's just citizens that are using technology that is, becoming increasingly more destructive and invasive to actually find people that they think are not being appropriately punished by other punitive systems or by the constabulary forces or just the judicial system in general, right? They feel like they're not being captured by institutional justice. And so they're going about it through open source intelligence techniques. And this is what they refer to as human flesh searches. And it's very, far more popular in places like in China, but it is becoming more popular in places like the United States and Australia. So again, I hope this sort of shines a light on, at least to my mind, my concern is the sort of rise in aptitude in using open source intelligence techniques and some of the less, some of those search engines that are not paid attention to in the same way as things like Google and Yahoo, but actually I think are more corrosive or more threatening.
Yeah, you're so right. We continue to ignore many important things, but we concentrate on someone. It's very usual. Anyway, there are a lot of questions. Thank you so much for your input. I guess I also like to have Shaheera's input on this as well because of the online conversation that we are having. Specifically when you are online and you're insecure, there are a lot of tactics that have been used by the terrorist groups has remained the online recruitment, right?
Yeah.
Your point on that?
Just building up on what Jade was saying, he correctly pointed out that more and more technologies are being used by the extremists and the radicalists who are online. And these pervasive and invasive technologies are posing very new kinds of threats. So we don't have a clear-cut answer as to what can be done in order to protect ourselves because of the very nature of the threat that we are facing, that is continuously adapting, is continuously changing in its nature, and so should our response be. So first of all, I think we have to start by recognizing the nature of the threat itself, how dynamic that is, and then develop the response accordingly by investing in cybersecurity. There are no easy solutions to it other than that, because we have to put pressure on the companies who are providing these platforms to make them more secure and stable. This is kind of like the supply side of the solution, but the demand side of it is actually how to make people more digitally resilient so that when they are faced with such kind of information, which is clickbait, which can actually, by just clicking on one link, take them down the rabbit hole, how not to do that. But then again, it's kind of like, I don't want to put all the emphasis on the end consumers themselves, because the kind of dangers that we are facing, you cannot actually rely on the people's skill to navigate that situation. So the governments have to do more. The technology provider companies have to do more in order to invest more and more in cybersecurity. And this is something where public-private partnerships can actually come in handy, where we not just identify the threat, but also work together how to invest more in creating the online space, which is better regulated, as well as which is safer for the public.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shaheera. This is important, especially for the government to take on. And one question that has been asked is about the food insecurity and lack of financial or physical access to food, and it will lead to affinity towards radical groups. How can we address it? And also, the question has been asked by Montazir. He's saying that I want to know about cross-border management during this COVID-19 with special reference to India and Pakistan as well. So let me also add one more question here. The questions have been asked about how law enforcement agencies in every country should equip themselves post-COVID. Any restrictions or buying or licenses for drones having certain flying range. So this has been question that has been asked as well before. And then, yes, so these are two questions. And then to the panelists, you all three can respond about, about related to India and Pakistan, the recent regional happenings, both conflicts between China and India, and then India and Pakistan, and is it related to COVID or something like that, or you can also discuss about that, and then also the question about the country restrictions on buying drones, which is very frequently recently, and they can be used in both ways, positive and negative. So floor is yours, yeah, guys.
About India-Pakistan border management, I mean, this is the most militarized border in the world. So the cross-border movement is already very scarce, minimal. So whatever little movement that was taking place, that has stopped. Kartarpur corridor was closed. Pakistan recently offered to reopen it. I think a group of Sikh Yatris did come. Um, Management of the border towards the Kashmir side, if the question is framed in the context of border dispute in the Galwan Valley of the Himalayan region between China and India, which is called the line of actual control. If you stretch it this way towards the India-Pakistan de facto border, it is line of control known as line of control. Line of control has been intermittently hot. There have been, border skirmishes, which is a routine matter. Pakistan does anticipate some impending Indian attack. I do not know. They'll have their own reason to say it. But other than that, I mean, the border management as far as India-Pakistan during COVID-19 is concerned, I don't see much of an issue there. The borders are closed everywhere. I mean, India-Pakistan border was closed anyway. So that's my answer to that. Food security. Food security, yes, there is this locust attack on standing crops as well. That has created a lot of issues. Going forward, if situation still remains the same way, environmental changes are a big factor in this as well. People believe that expert of this area believe that in the monsoon, this is if there are more ponds in the desert areas, and if still the locust is there, they will incubate and there will be a bigger attack coming towards the end of August, start of September, or the monsoon season. So then things are going to get a lot worse. Now, how do the states respond to it? I think if these, because I'm not an expert in this area, if these assumptions are correct, and if these fears are correct, then I think the states, both India and Pakistan, need to take right steps how to address it. How are they going to do it? I'm not an expert on that. So I really can't comment on that. But of course, you need to have your stocks filled, anticipating any uh, uh, insecurity in that sector. The last part about what can be done about technology and all. So with the challenge, there is an opportunity as well. And we couldn't reflect on that. And that opportunity is that if you would have heard that in Pakistan, particular reference, the surveillance technology which is used to track militants was being used for contact tracing. And contact tracing in and of itself is a big experiment where you can really know where people were, who they met, what were they doing, because this space between the private and public has become blurred with COVID-19, right? So while there is an opportunity for the terrorists, and the funding in counter-terrorism is going to decrease, there are all those challenges. With those challenges, there is an opportunity to innovate as well. So a lot of what is going on vis-a-vis the technology during the pandemic, some of it would be used for surveillance in counter-terrorism going forward. So there is an opportunity. So it's not all doom and gloom here. There is a window of opportunity there for counter-terrorism policing as well. About licensing of the technology, I think this is one sector where the debate now has to start, that greater penetration of the technology and the rules for the licensing, how do they go about it, how much of it needs to be regulated, how much of it needs to be deregulated. There is this one big area where there are some question marks. Also, maybe sometimes the militants like to, overhype their capabilities. Are they really able to get drones? Will a militant be able to get a drone? Is it that easy? We do not know. Also the question, is it, shooting down a drain is no big deal. But are we going to have that kind of capability in our streets? That really doesn't happen. So I think those licensing, and this is where the dialogue between the governments and the technology companies come in. This is where the private partnerships going forward is going to become important, not only between the technological giants and the government, but also between the social media companies and the government. Because as Shaheera said, as Jade said, a lot of these narratives are germinating, incubating in the social media space, and they are making a lot of money out of it. So their social corporate responsibility obligates them to cooperate with the government and be the eyes and the ears of the government. Now, there are some all of this discussion needs to take place going forward. So yeah.
Thank you, Basit. This was wonderful input. I think that it's important, especially when we recently, Jade, I also like have your input as well on this conversation. Especially, we have seen the Christchurch recent. It's almost a year now, and they will be celebrating. They're having their anniversary of the day. Christchurch attack on the mosque, and it was terrible incident. But when we look at the policies of Facebook and other such social media companies, we don't see as much kind of regulation that are required, and when people go live like that, that was also, played live. So when we see that, I think that we can reckon about what Basit was saying. What is your take on that? Because, it's the safe spaces that terrorists are enjoying, not only in the communities, but also online. I mean, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, I can at least pick up on this issue of, government and private partnerships. And I am actually, concerned about this because it does graduate private companies, as Basit says, as being the eyes and ears of the government. But particularly in this time of crisis, the government is approaching these private companies hoping that they will cooperate with them, right? Which isn't a good, kind of power position in these circumstances, right? For the government to kind of, prostrate themselves and say, look, we will come to you if you provide us with the technology to be able to monitor our citizens in a way that outside of the circumstances of a crisis would not nearly be as appropriate, right? Or accepted, particularly, again, like I'm speaking out of, the cases of Australia and the United States and Canada at this point. I should probably highlight that. But my concern is that this use of mass surveillance, of digital surveillance and data surveillance through like population-wide contract tracing, it feels like, particularly not only the crisis, but also perhaps concerns around right-wing extremism and terrorism, feels like this kind of this invasive digital monitoring, which in some states has included the use of cell phone data to collect not only for, as I said, purposes for COVID-19, but also counterterrorism purposes. This repurposed monitoring of individuals and their behavioral data, they can also use other tools and techniques such as geofencing, contact chaining, facial recognition, and other biometric tools. And I guess my question is it's okay, I suppose, that we all feel like this sense of urgency is so we should encourage these government and private partnerships. but there will be a future where COVID-19 and the circumstances of this crisis sort of recede, and then how will those kinds of partnerships be renewed in the circumstances outside of a crisis? How will those technologies continue to be used within society? Where will that behavioral data go? Where is it going to be stored? Is it going to be repurposed for something else? I mean, just considering recent history, tell Silicon Valley to give back their data, right? They won't give anything back, like not even a single user's profile or any of the behavioral data that's, on the back end of a single person's profile. So my concern is around, perhaps just a cautionary message, and that is that these government-private partnerships seem very efficacious, right? It seems like we could use them very efficiently in ways to stop the spread of the virus and for certain counterterrorism purposes. But my concern is that I actually do not have the faith in, those companies to not only use that data for my interest, for the entirety of that data's existence.
Yeah, if anybody
can I
wants
just
to
add
add
one more point?
please, Shaheera, go ahead.
So just adding on to it, I think Naomi Klein explains this concept very well in her book, Shock Doctrine, where she talks about whenever there is a shock in the external environment, governments, especially the authoritarian governments, use that shock in order to pass certain regulations and policies that wouldn't be accepted by the public under normal circumstances. And I think this is a very important point which should be noted, that while we are advocating for companies to be more proactive in terms of providing safety mechanisms and governments to collaborate more and more with private companies, but at the same time, not only do we have to observe what the private companies are doing, but also what kind of policies and legislations governments are passing, because not all governments are purely democratic. There are a lot of authoritarian governments as well, and then there are governments which are a mixture of authoritarianism and democratic nature. So what kind of policies that they're passing, and what is the assurity that the data which is being collected of the citizens under the guise of protection is not going to be used against the people? So this is also like a very slippery slope, that while we say that this is important because we cannot imagine an alternative to this at this point in time, but there is this caveat attached to this as well, that you don't know that this will not be used against the public for mass surveillance. So there needs to be regulation around and much more debate around that aspect as well.
Yeah, thank you, Shaheera, for this input. There are two more questions that have been asked in the group as well, and I think that these are important because they're saying that in post-COVID-19 world, is there is a possibility of an outbreak of terrorism? As such, there's kind of a terrorism that we are, complete outbreak in a sense of, because we are living in a world which is not only having a lot of big challenge as COVID-19, but also terrorism itself is a big challenge which has remained since for the last almost 2 decades, and we are facing. And this new COVID-19 has also created a lot of kind of possibilities. I mean, scary possibilities of creating another outbreak of terrorism. And this was a question that has been asked. There is another comment by Mr. Practice Zablut, who is also the expert from the European delegation. He was saying that the COVID-19 crisis gives an opportunity to left-wing and environmentalist radical groups to attack the symbols of the system in Europe. And then currently 5G telephone network is under physical attack. It is a symbol of high-tech mass surveillance and accused of spreading COVID-19 by people prone to conspirations. I mean, he's saying about the conspiracy theories. And there are questions, there are a lot of questions about the management of the borders and stuff like that. But, I think that, you all three can respond to about the recent happening there in Europe and, of course, in the region about the outbreak of a terrorist attack, especially happening in our neighbor, Afghanistan, as we look at it and how the things are building up there as well. Basit, Jade, and Shaheera.
So, will there be terrorism in post-COVID-19 world? There has always been terrorism. There will be terrorism. The interesting angle here going forward, and it's purely coincidental, that this debate on fifth global wave of terrorism has now started within the terrorism scholarship. So Bruce Hoffman, who is a known authority on terrorism, he has recently written a couple of articles referring to the growth and expansion of right-wing extremism within the Western world as the probable fifth wave of global terrorism. Jade has talked a lot about it. Just a couple of quick points on that. Number one is two elements which really give them that transnational character. Number one is their ability to network together on social media across Europe. They went to Ukraine. Groups in Poland were hosted in UK. Groups in UK were hosted in Poland, etc., etc. One attack led to the another. For instance, the Christchurch mosque attack was inspired by the attack in Norway, and then the attacks which followed the Christchurch, they used the Christchurch attacker as the symbol and inspiration. So there is this networking of these various strands of right-wing extremism that gives them a transnational character, number one. Number two, the scholars now believe that ethno-nationalism is going to be perhaps the new wave. Now the questions are there, is this a sub-wave within the ongoing wave of terrorism was the wave of religious fundamentalism, which started in 1979 Iranian Revolution and the Afghan Jihad. So it preceded the left-wing brigades in the West, inspired by Marxism, Leninism. So is ethno-nationalist wave going to supplant the religious fundamentalist wave? We see religious fundamentalism increasing, it's not decreasing. So can there be two waves simultaneously? There can be two waves simultaneously. So this debate is there. Right-wing extremism in the West has arrived. It has matured. They have shown the tendency of afflicting various levels of violence, mass attacks like the Christchurch attack, and individual lone wolf kind of violence, unaffiliated, self-initiated individuals, but they are networked and they think alike. So from combat skills to very rudimentary skills, there is all kind of violent tendencies in there. So terrorism will be there in a different form. There will be other forms of violence, as I said, anti-government attitudes, anti-technology attitudes, frustrated, unemployed people looking for a meaning, uncertain what is going to happen to them. It's an explosive mix. So there will be terrorism, definitely. What forms this terrorism will take, we'll have to wait and see. Will one wave supplant the other? We do not know. These are, as of now, if you ask me, the character of the overall global militant landscape, it is characterized by chaos. There is a lot of noise, very little activity, and it's chronic, it's chaotic. What will happen post-pandemic? We will have to wait and see, but I have done some speculation based on what we know. Yeah, Jade can add to it.
Yeah, Jade and Shaheera, both your last comments on the question.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think I should probably pick up around like this idea that there is, not only going to be instances of right-wing terrorism following COVID-19, but there are behaviors that right-wing extremist groups and individuals now and in recent years that are advocating for an international outlook, and they're exhibiting or displaying transnational behaviors. And some of these are like enacting very similarly structured or designed acts of violent extremism or terrorism. So for instance, since 2011, right, there has not only been an increased concentration of right-wing terrorist attacks globally, but each attacker is virtually connected to another through the dissemination of each other's manifestos or other kinds of content. And each attacker has also taken reference and replicated parts of their predecessors' methodologies, right? So although they're attempting to execute attacks, and in some cases is being thwarted by national authorities or constabulatory forces, right, there are continued attempts to replicate very similarly technologically supported mass casualty, mass shooter attacks, where the assailant is, designing their attack to be appreciated by the transnational movement, right? They are doing, and I know that you mentioned before about Brenton Tarrant and his use of live streaming. So he successfully self-filmed and live streamed himself in the attack using a body cam, as we know, and highlighted the location of that live stream within his manifesto online, when he also uploaded the manifesto to various file sharing sites. And also reshared it across, not only mainstream but alternative platforms, right? So various platforms like Mediafire, ZippyShare, YouTube, LiveLink, BitChute, Facebook, and all these other ones. And this not only creates like a crude bridge between that right-wing terrorist and the community, but also it has this, it's devastatingly effective in not only securing notoriety for him at a transnational level, but every time this happens, it becomes another flag in the ground, right, for someone else to either try to replicate or have, or, sort of glean some sort of aspiration from, right? And it's these kinds of behaviors that I think are becoming increasingly steered towards an international outlook that gives, credit to the concern that there will, possibly, be in some cases a more organized or cooperative effort to, generate some terrorist attack of some sort. And this is coupled with the idea that, some of these groups and individuals are just becoming better at using the technology, as Brenton Tarrant exampled.
Yeah, Shaheera, please
Just
go ahead.
adding like one last point to it, that along with the threats that we are facing right now, we have to also understand that this is also kind of like an information warfare. Whoever has control over the discourse in this day and age has the ultimate power. And this is what we see playing out on the social media platforms and the digital platforms as well, where the accurate news and information is basically being crowded out by the propaganda, by the extremists, as well as the conspiracy theories, which are being peddled out in such a mass amount that we don't know where to begin from. So this kind of not only creates its own set of challenges, but also highly undermines the authority of the government and the experts on the overall discourse. And as soon as you start to lose that authority and more people occupy that space, it kind of challenges their legitimacy as well as the writ on the main discourse. So we have seen that in the physical space where non-state actors have tried to take the writ away from the state, but now we are seeing that crowding out being done on the online spaces as well. And where we go from here will be largely determined by how we actually deal with the propaganda which is being propagated under the along with COVID-19. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Shaheera. I think that this is completely sums up that what the global space or a local space or an online space that we are currently facing, especially in these challenging times when we are facing with the pandemic. I think that a lot has been done. A lot has been, there's a lot of soul searching for not only the government, states, and for us all to see that how vulnerable we were before and how vulnerable we are still right now as a result of our policies that we could not implement, or because of the a lot of terrorist activities that has been done for past many years. We have been unable to develop a mechanism for bringing each other closer together so that we can build a scenario or build a coalition or something like to connect to each other together, right? So you can address the problems. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm so sorry for the glitch that has been happened today. It's technology that we were discussing a lot about technology, how technology is creating a lot of chaos and how it's helping us a lot as well. Thank you so much. This was a webinar that we Basit and everyone you have enriched the discussion, of course, and those people who had joined us, thank you so much for your time and your presence in the webinar. We've been discussing a lot about how this terrorism has evolved during the COVID-19. Thank you so much, Shaheera, for your kind presence. You were strategic communication, consultant there in Democracy Reporting International. Thank you so much for your kind presence. Jade, thank you so much for joining us. It is late there in Australia for you. You are part of the Department of Security Studies and Criminology there in Austria, and Research Center for Media and Journalism there in Netherlands. Thank you so much for your kind presence. And of course, Basit, thank you so much for your guidance and your presence as well in this webinar. You're also part of this, important university there, Rajaratnam School of Technology. Thank you so much, everyone, for your kind presence. We were live there at the Facebook as well. This will be recorded. I will be sharing this recording as well later on our YouTube channel. This is an academic discussion. This is academic discourse that we will like to, not only stop here, but we'll like to continue further. And we'll continue doing this kind of conversations later half of this year as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Stay safe, and thank you so much for your kind presence. I'll be ending this webinar. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you so much for your presence.